Hello everyone. Today I am going to deal with the seminal essay Whatever Happened to the Vedic Dasi by Uma Chakravarthi, who is popularly known as the mother of Indian feminist movement. And this particular essay forms part of another crucial work, that is Recasting Women, Essays in Colonial History by Sudesh Vaid and Kungum Singari. And this particular text is a landmark contribution by the Indian feminist movement, and it reconstructs reform movements in colonial India with special reference to caste, class and gender. So, let me come to the essay. So, Uma Chakravarthi situates the 19th century historiography of the women's question within the cultural and ideological encounter between England and India in this particular essay. And in the course, she analyzes the stages and factors involved in the formation of the present historical consciousness. And she says that as part of developing this particular historical consciousness, the foregrounding of the Aryan woman, which is an amalgamation of the Brahminical and Kshatriya values, actually happened, and a total disappearance of the Vedic Dasi happened, and everything actually happened in the 19th century. And this particular sense of history or the glorious past we have actually constructed for ourselves actually continued into the 20th century as well as into the present. So, she wants to describe, she wants to analyze how this particular image is the typical Indian superwoman evolved and how we deconstructed, reconstructed our history in the 19th century. So, this reconstitution of our historical consciousness happened in the second half of the 19th century. That is what Uma Chakravarthi actually says. And she begins by telling us that we form our historical sense through the combination of oral as well as the written traditions. Oral tradition in the sense that myths in the form of folk tales, the heroic tales like our Amar Chitragada and all, and whatever we actually hear from our grandparents, from others, the stories, the myths, etc., is actually overlaid by the written sources. What we study in the textbooks, what we actually read in the different standard journals, serious discussions, etc. So, we create a historical sense by the intertwining of the oral as well as the written traditions, and never ever think that this history is given facts, given truths. They are not given truths. They are deliberately and consciously created brick by brick to suit our self-image or to suit the self-image of a particular era. So, the same thing actually happened in the 19th century when we Indians desperately wanted a new self-image for ourselves. We constructed a history for us to counter the humiliation we suffered at the hands of the British colonialists. So, we created our own history, and of course, the British excavators and the European philosophers and the historians actually helped us. The Orientalists, the contribution of the Orientalists is the greatest in creating this glorious past for us. And at the same time, there was the attack by the missionaries, and the Anglicists was there like a Mill, Duff and Grant. But the Orientalists actually helped us boost our self-image, and everything actually happened in the 19th century. And she is actually telling us the story of how this particular history, the magnificent, glorious past for us is step by step, brick by brick created for us in our freedom struggle. Okay. So, I told you it was to counter the colonial humiliation we suffered at the hands of the British that we created this glorious past for us. And prominent, and it happened during the 3 phases. So, she traces 3 phases of reconstruction in creating this new history for us. And the first phase is the work of the first generation Orientalists, the Anglicists, the Evangelists and the proto-nationalists up to 1850. And the second phase constitutes of the second generation Orientalists, especially Max Muller and his 2 women counterparts, and the emergence of cultural nationalism between 1850 and 1880. So, the first phase, second phase and the third phase, on the third section she actually deals with she contrasts this constructed image with the ground realities. Okay. Then, so let us see what she discusses in the first part. So, she is actually going to tell us about the contributions made by the Asiatic Society, who did the real research, excavations and research, and they constantly publish articles boosting our self image, because we discovered a glorious civilization, the Indus Valley civilization, and rediscovery of the Vedas. Everything actually happened. A precious literature, a precious past was actually rediscovered to us, rediscovered for us by this Orientalists and the Asiatic researchers. Okay. So, William, you are familiar with William Jones, he is the prominent one, and but she says that there was no issue of women's question. A women's issue was never raised by this William Jones, even though these Orientals actually talk about a glorious past, that nobody actually bothered about the image of the Indian woman. So, he makes only a passing reference to Gargi, and there is no reference to Sati at all. People never bothered. Sati existed, and the sufferings of the Indian women was a reality, but nobody bothered about the experiences, the bitter experiences of Indian women. No more reference to Sati. Sati was a practice, but nobody bothered about Sati. These people never bothered about, because they internalized the patriarchal concepts. It was considered as natural for Indian people. And but it is H.T. Colebrook, another Orientalist, H.T. Colebrook, who actually came up with the Sati, the issue of Sati, the women issue. The issue was actually taken up by H.T. Colebrook for the first time. And while writing on the duties of the faithful Hindu widow, he actually talks about what the Sati, the burning woman, the image of the burning woman, the Sati was actually presented before the Europeans. And whenever people actually thought about India, this burning woman came to their minds. How gross! At the same time, mystic in the sense that she was actually following, so faithful that she is willingly and happily and following her husband to the other world. See how glorious, how mystic, but gross in the sense that it could not be taught. It was the gross brutality that can be attributed to any woman burning alive. Okay, then so it was at once gross and at the same time mystical. Okay, then. And H.T. Colebrook actually talks about Sati, and he also makes a casual reference to Gargi and Maitreyi and the Yajnavalkya episode in his essay, but no particular importance is actually given to these women. And his major contribution is that he is for the first time making a reference to the Vedas. The best achievement of the Aryans is actually Vedas. So, that is what H.T. Colebrook actually says. And the Reconstruction actually takes the form of a practical and utilitarian turn when the 19th century British legislations actually began against Sati and other atrocities against women. So, in this the Britishers were actually assisted by Raja Ram Mohan Roy and people like Mrityunjay Vidyalangar, who has actually started the war against Sati, the crusade against Sati even before Raja Ram Mohan Roy. So, these people wanted a strong argument. So, in order to support their argument in the fight against Sati, that Raja Ram Mohan Roy actually popularized this Gargi Maitreyi episode. They projected that the ultimate aim of Indian woman is no total obedience to her husband. It is not Padivrata Dharma. He has more dharmas, dharma to the nation, dharma to the God Almighty. So, it is they are not just expected to be satis, but they have to selflessly join with the divine force. So, they are actually making use of what? The religious argument to counter a religious evil. So, it was Raja Ram Mohan Roy who actually projected the Gargi Maitreyi episode to counter the Sati, which he thought as a social evil or an evil that actually infiltrated into the Hindu religion. And it was a time when the proto-nationalist feelings were actually emerging, and people were actually making tales for themselves, heroic tales were actually talked about or created about heroic rajas and other warrior heroes who actually fought for independence, fought against the British. So, the proto-national spirit was actually emerging, and it was at that time that the attack upon Hinduism actually happened through the works of Mill, Grant and Duff and the missionaries. They wanted to reform, they wanted to convert, so they had to come up with their own arguments. And Mill, in his colossal work of Indian history, actually talks about the degraded status of women. They were not given education, they did not have property rights, they were segregated, and they were not included in the sacred texts. They were totally debased, and they had to burn in the funeral pyre of their husbands. So, everywhere Indian women were actually degraded and debased, and this was actually ingrained in the Hindu system, and it was not newly introduced by the Mohammedans. So, this enraged the Hindu ego. So, they considered it as what? An attack upon their religious identity, and even the legislation against sati was actually taken as what? An infiltration into the sacred arena of Indian family. See, okay. So, Mill says that it did not come up with the Mohammedans, and he also adds that the effeminate men of India, the soft men of India cannot, who is constantly debasing Indian women, and they cannot actually protect her from the British, and the British had to intervene in the protection of the Indian woman. So, he supports the colonial intervention on the in the form of legislations and otherwise. Okay. So, this enraged what? The newly emerging national consciousness and religious consciousness and the cultural consciousness. And next we can actually see what the emergence of the cultural nationalism in the 1815. So, this was one of the reasons. Okay. So, she actually traces 3 reasons for the rise of cultural nationalism in the 1850s, and the first is the attack of the Anglicists on Hinduism, and second one is the attempts towards conversion by the Christian missionaries, and the third one is the abolition of sati. So, people were enraged, and they came up to counter the arguments of Mill and the Christian missionaries, and the criticism actually meted out to them by the Anglicists. Okay. The Orientalists of course actually boosted our past glory, but the attack on the part of the Anglicists actually enraged the Indians. When Rajaram was actually quoting our religious text to counter sati, nobody was enraged. When somebody else is actually talking about us in negative terms, we actually rise in rebellion. Okay, the same thing actually happened. And so, let us see the embryonic stage in writing history, and as part of this embryonic stage, the proto stage, Raja Pratapa Aditya Charita was actually written about the hero of Mysore, and Rajaboli by Mrityunjay Vidyalangar, another crucial form of writing history. Then it actually covered the heroes, not only Hindus, Muslims and British heroes who are from Kurukshetra to Plassey was actually dealt with. And but Mill actually went on criticizing. So, this is a time of proto-nationalism, and their national spirit was emerging, and it is at this time that Mill actually came up with his criticism of the Hinduism and the type of treatment Hinduism actually meted out to its women. So, the next generation writers who came up, especially Govinda Chandra Sen and Piri Chandra Mitra, actually tried to counter all the arguments. So, it was a covered snipe upon this particular Mill and other criticisms by the Britishers upon Hinduism and Hindu women, that they began what? They began countering or creating a self image for themselves. And Govinda Chandra Sen and Puri Chandra Mitra are the important names in creating this ancient history for, as one concentrated upon the medieval history and other concentrated upon the ancient history. And For example, Piri Chandra Mitra glorified Indian, ancient Indian women, and he quotes from Mahanirban Charita, and he says that Mahanirban Charita actually says that a girl child should be carefully nourished, and she should be married off to a suitable husband, only to a suitable husband. That is what Mahanirban Charita actually tells about Indian girls. Okay, and he also quotes Kalidasa. He quotes from Tamil text, and she talks about other Lilavadi, she talks about Auvayar. So, towards this particular time, so towards the end of this first phase, a new feminine identity based on high culture is gradually evolving, because it is on the women's question that the English and the Indians actually began to fight with. A cultural and ideological fight actually happened, centering upon the image of the Indian woman, or the experience of the or the status of the Indian woman. So, naturally the image of the Indian woman side by side with the development of the glorious history is actually happening. So, the achievements, the achiever was the high caste Indian woman, and the Vedic Dasi was nowhere in the picture. So, in order to counter the glorious European woman, we wanted a superwoman for ourselves. So, the Aryan woman is actually gradually rising. Okay. Then the second generation, so the part 2, she actually talks about the contribution of the second generation of Orientalists, especially Max Muller, W. Hunter, and Mrs. Pass, and Clarissa Bader. Okay, so Max Muller and the second generation Orientalists, or the contribution to the second generation Orientalists, were actually supported by the works, or in addition to this, Ranade, Bankim Chandra Chatterjee, and Dayananda also were actually coming up with their glorious works boosting our self-image. Okay, so let us deal with Muller, Max Muller. So, Max Muller actually popularized the term Aryan, and he projected Vedas as their greatest achievement. But Uma Chakravarthi points out that he did not take up the women question, the women question. He never bothered about it, maybe because he had internalized the European patriarchal value. So, he took it for granted, and nowhere in his writings he actually said that Indian women were spiritual or learned, and he actually says that he is quoting Srauta and the Grihya Sutras, and says that women were never educated, because if they will be given education, they will refuse to be domestic slaves. So, what is this Grihya and the Srauta Sutras actually says about women? So, never ever educate women, because in the future they will refuse to be domestic slaves, and moreover they will impart this wisdom to undeserving lower castes and classes. So, she should not be educated. And anyway, the ultimate contribution of Max Muller through his research, the linguistic and the literary research and philosophical historical research, is that he established the racist Aryan version of the Orientalist Hindu golden age. And the second important Orientalist was W. Hunter, while Max Muller actually talked about the Indians in total. Hunter actually found out that there was stratification on the basis of caste, gender, etc. And he acknowledged that the stratification on the base of division, on the base of caste and religious divisions. But he took up the women's question. Hunter took up the women's question, and this particular image, glorious image actually created by Max Muller, the glorious past given to us by Max Muller, was actually extended to Indian women by his women counterpart, that Mrs. Speyer and Clarice Bader. And Mrs. Speyer was actually she was both shocked, at the same time she was enchanted by the Sati image. We have discussed this particular point earlier, and she was at the same. Anyway, she is actually projecting the Gargi Maitreyi episode to tell us that there existed a glorious past for Indian women, and she places the golden age of Indian womanhood in the Vedic period, especially during the time of the Brahminical text. So, this is the contribution of Mrs. Speyer, and she tells tells us that it is Manu who debased women, and he placed obedience, that was the supreme virtue expected from an Indian woman, obedience, total blind obedience to her husbands and no obedience to the nation. She is not expected to bother about other issues. Let men deal with that. Her primary duty and ultimate duty was so obedience to men, the Pativrata Dharma, and obediently follow him to the funeral pyre, nothing else. And Mrs. Pyre actually talks about the Satyavan, Savitri and the Nala Damayanti examples to glorify that some sort of conjugal equality existed, conjugal love and equality and ideal relationships actually existed in the past. And Clarice Bader says that women actually offered sacrifices in their own names. Another example of women having self-esteem, women being independent in the past. She says that women had the freedom to offer sacrifices in her own name, okay, individually. And she also talks about Vispala, who was a prominent fighter during the times. And she projects the discussion between Maitreyi and Yajnavalkya. So, it is Clarice Bader who is projecting the Maitreyi Yajnavalkya episode to say that Indian women can actually be spiritual, they can be knowledgeable, they can acquire wisdom, and they can acquire spiritual knowledge, and they can participate in scholarly discussions. So, these people actually places the glorious, the golden age of Indian woman in the Vedic era. Okay, then, and she deliberately says that the fall of Indian woman actually came with Manu and the Krishna cult, which was gross and materialistic, and also the Mohammedans completed this particular fall. So, Manu, the Krishna cult and the Mohammedans actually completed the downfall of Indian woman. Okay. The second, in total, we can summarize that the contribution of the second generation Orientalists actually said that the Hindu golden age is actually as a result of the work of the second generation of Orientalists, the Hindu golden age came to be situated or came to be transformed into an Aryan golden age. The Hindu golden age actually transformed into an Aryan golden age. And this image, that is the Aryan race being glorified, actually boosted the upper class national identity. Okay. Then along with actually began the attribution of certain martial qualities to certain races. Okay, for example, martial qualities were attributed to the Marathas, the Rajputs and the Sikhs, and tales actually glorifying the achievements of Marathas, Rajputs and Sikhs were actually coming to the forefront. And for example, Ranade actually glorified Shivaji and the Marathas. And in 1857 we got a new generation of heroes and heroines who participated in the first war of our Indian independence. Rani Lakshmi Bai and others who came to the forefront. So, new heroes are actually emerging. Okay. And this history writing followed with literature. So, history plus literature actually contributed to the rise of militant cultural nationalism. Okay. And the prominent one was Bankim Chandra Chatterjee, who actually combined militancy and spirituality through in his works, for example, Anand Math. And another contribution by Bankim Chandra Chatterjee is that he purified the Krishna cult. So, one of the lady Orientalists actually criticized the Krishna cult. So, Bankim began to purify Krishna, the materialist, the voluptuous aspects of Krishna were actually purged, and he represents Krishna before us as an philosophical leader, a philosophical leader. Okay, and we can worship, a worshipable character. So, Krishna cult was actually purged of all the atrocities, the materialism, and Krishna emerged as a spiritual and philosophical hero for us. Okay, so this is the contribution of Bankim Chandra Chatterjee. Okay, then. So, anyway, in the as a result of Bankim's writings, we can actually see that in his writings we can see that the lower class and the working class were gradually becoming one class, and they become totally excluded from the writings, and and we can see that the un-Aryan and the Muslim and the working class become combined and totally excluded from Indian writings and Indian history. Okay. Then next is a contribution by Dayananda Saraswati and the Arya Samaj during the workings of Arya Samaj, the gross polytheism of Indian Hinduism was tried to be replaced by monotheism, and Dayananda also actually believed in a religious and idyllic haven for women in the Vedic period. Okay. And he glorified motherhood. So, Dayananda actually glorified motherhood, and he considered it as the greatest achievement of an Indian woman. So, simply because he worshipped motherhood, he promoted what? Widow and widower remarriage. Otherwise, there is a possibility of the what? Adulteration of the sexuality of the widow as well as the widower. Anyway, channelize the evil sexuality into something glorious. If they can be mothers, they can further be mothers and fathers, a glorious race, a vigorous race can be reconstituted. So, let them remarry. So, these people are actually using religious arguments for the construction or to counter or to alleviate the evils from Indian societies. For good causes, they are actually coming up with what? Religious arguments. Okay. And in the third stage, Indian women seem to have internalized this particular myth of the golden age being situated in the Vedic era, and Indian women, the Aryan woman, an amalgamation of the Brahminical as well as the Kshatriya values was emerging as ideal. So, women of India have actually internalized this particular truth, and warrior heroines Vispala and Lakshmi Jhansi Rani. So, women like this, fighters. Okay, when you are actually using militancy for political purposes, it is actually justified. So, they are actually female militancy, we can see side by side with the Swadeshi movement, female militancy is actually coming to the front, and the best example is Sarala Bai, and in the third stage, on the third part, on the third phase, it was she was actually countering the image deliberately created for us with the ground realities, and she is actually quoting Sarala Bai and Pandita Ramabai. Sarala Bai was actually born into Tagore, the glorious Tagore family, and unlike other women, she wanted to be a teacher. So, no, it was not considered as proper for a woman born in a high caste family, a noble family, to go out for any profession. Anyway, teaching is considered as a glorious profession. She wanted to be a teacher, and she went to South India, but she came back humiliated. What happened is that one night some young man actually entered into her room, and she actually, anyway, she escaped, and she went back to her own family. So, everybody accused her. So, this is what women actually do when they get what? Western education. Anyway, so her ambition for freedom, ambition for individuality was not quenched, and she is actually channelizing this particular ambition into freedom fighting. So, this is what happened. So, she popularized the national heroic culture in Bengal, and she is actually creating Pratapaditya, who was actually a patricide. He was a patricide. He was not worthy of being a hero at all. When Tagore actually asked his niece, why you are actually projecting Pratapaditya, who cannot be a hero? She just says that I am not projecting a moral hero, I am just projecting a warrior hero, okay, who fought against the British. So, this is the bold answer she gave, and she also wrote children's books actually presenting heroes, and she also promoted the Rakhi festival, and it is in one of the Pratapaditya festivals, and that this Vande Mataram was actually emerging as a war cry for the nationalism. And the next example is actually Rema. So, woman was actually coming to the forefront of freedom fighting. So, she is actually coming out of the households when she is actually fighting, when she is actually using her energy for fighting for the national cause, it was justified. Otherwise, it was not justified at all. Anyway, so next example, Uma quotes is Remabai, Pandita Pandita Ramabai. Okay. Anyway, she was well versed in the Sanskritic and the Western education, and so her arguments could not be that totally easily and evaded. Okay. And he had a very bold father who actually dared to teach Sanskrit to his wife. See, no Brahmin ever dared to teach his in those times. They never dared to teach their daughters or wives Sanskrit. So this man dared to teach Sanskrit to his wife, who actually cherished her daughter, and she taught Ramabai Sanskrit, and they were excommunicated, and they had to settle in the forest due to this sort of excommunication. Okay, people could not easily tolerate women getting education, especially the sacred education. Okay. Ramabai had an elder sister who was actually married off to an illiterate Brahmin boy, and her scholarly father actually wanted her elder sister and son-in-law to remain with him. But the boy actually wanted to return to his house, and he did not want any studies. He preferred his parents, his family over his studies, and he summoned his wife to come to his parental house, and she refused. Okay. And Ramabai actually says that this is the freedom women had. So any man can actually drag her from her own house to a place she does not want to belong to. So this thing actually won't happen to an Indian man. Okay. Anyway, this boy, what did this sister's husband do? He actually summoned the entire community, because it was established custom that a wife should actually remain in the house of the husband. So he summoned the entire community, and the entire community actually demanded that her sister should actually go to this husband's house. And Ramabai actually says that anyway her sister actually escaped because she caught cholera and she died. So this was a sort of escape for an Indian woman, and she ironically states that that might have been the reason why women actually preferred death by cholera, or she preferred sati, because it was a living hell for Indian women in her childhood and in her adulthood and as a and widowhood. So this was the living hell for Indian women. So that is what she says. Anyway, so her father died, and she and her mother died earlier, and she and her brother had to walk long 2000 miles to go to Calcutta and settle there. And during this 2000-mile walk, she has actually seen the atrocities meted out to the Indian women, and she finally tells us that there was no golden age for women in the past, and there is no golden age for women now. So she actually quotes the census, 1870 census, where almost 300 girl children were actually eaten by wolves. So this is the data given in the 1870 wolves. See, children can be eaten by wolves, and all of them are particularly specifically preferred by the wolves were actually girls. What might have happened? So the unwanted girl children might have been killed and thrown to the forest. So they might have been eaten by the wolves. So we will see only the data that 300 girl children were actually eaten by wolves only in Amritsar alone, not in the entire India. Okay, so this is what is actually happening to the Indian girls. So during the while a woman is actually going to become pregnant, so there are certain rites she had to obey. She had to observe for getting boy children, and she had to get boys in order to please their husbands and husbands' family, and girl, and even the birth of a girl was actually considered as a sort of curse upon the family. So it was total hell for even before birth, girls will be killed, and even after birth they can be so easily killed, and she is actually going to the husband's family as a domestic slave. So this is the ground reality. And what about widows? Widows were actually used in different types, and it was living hell for these widows, and the worst is the case of the child widow, because it was the worst curse of God. She might have actually faced or done something evil in her previous birth. That is why she became a widow so early. So this is what Ramabai actually says. And she is also quoting another the example of Rukumbai, a minor girl who was actually married off, and she had to and her husband actually wanted to accompany him. So, he was a consumptive and he was on the verge of his death, and he was illiterate, and this girl did not want to go to his house. Anyway, the entire Indians actually rose up in rebellion, because when the British court actually passed a verdict that this girl is not expected to accompany her husband, the entire nation, the entire menfolk actually rose in rebellion, and they threatened the British government to annul this particular law. So, they considered it as a threat to the family. Okay. Anyway, Rukumbai did not go to her husband's house, and she also might have died, and she is quoting Ranade. So, Ranade, a famous nationalist and a leader, he actually talked that this is what happens when girls are actually given Western education. They refuse to be refuse to go to her husband's house and live in a peaceful way with her husband. Okay, then, and she also reveals the double stands taken by Ranade, Tilak, and Vivekananda. They never bothered about the women question. Okay, they were projected national heroes, but when the women issue came, they took what double standards. So, Ranade actually talked about what a widow remarriage. She also exposes the known national leaders like Ranade, Tilak, and Vivekananda, who always wanted to polish the image of the Indian woman before the Europeans, and they never acknowledged that Indian women ever faced a problem. So, she finally states that this nation's identity came to lay in the culture, and more specifically in its womanhood, and image became important. So, when Vivekananda was actually addressing the Westerners, he says that the entire estate of the a husband actually goes to the wife, while a European man can actually dishonor his wife, and where women were actually burned as witches in India, Indian women actually happily burn at the funeral pyre. See, she is actually quoting Vivekananda and telling this. So, whenever women's question arose, and he is actually coming up with glorified images of the Gargi and the Maitreyi and the Sita and other Indian women who were actually having glorious fights and glorious deaths and mystified. So, for these national leaders, there never existed a problem for Indian women. Everything was perfect and ideal for Indian womanhood. So, in this nation's identity actually lay in the culture, and more specifically in its womanhood. So, and the image became more important than reality, and ultimately the image becomes the reality, and the burning problems remain unaddressed and unresolved. So, when we care for image making alone, the burning issues any women or anyone had to face remain unaddressed and unresolved. This is how she concludes.